Ymedia Group, the fastest growing media group in North America.
Ramanaj, I'll come back to you. Let's talk about the Iranian community. As I was mentioning earlier, the Iranian community is facing challenges in Dubai. That's a media report that I'm sharing with you. There is discussion their golden visas could be cancelled. There's discussion they're facing tough time. There was a hospital there for many years, and that hospital had almost 700 people, the Iranian hospital in Dubai, and they're saying many of their employees have been told to go back to Iran. And there's also a mention of so many other things. So the Iranian community, whether they're in London, England, whether they're in California, New York, Greater Toronto area, Greater Vancouver. So what's the discussion going on, and if at all the media reports are true in Dubai, because Dubai has been targeted the most, even ahead of Israel as well. They're not able to target US for sure, US mainland, but ahead of Israel, Dubai has been targeted a lot by Iran. So I want to have a sense what the Iranian community is discussing right now. Please.
Yes, that has happened right away. UAE has a lot of Iranian population. It's been there for decades now, and it's a big community. Of course, it's one of the biggest communities outside of Iran in the Middle East, and that was immediately what the UAE government pushed out as soon as the war started. So yes, that's been going around in the Iranian community as well as Iranian media. And as well as, if you can imagine, all the Telegram chats and all of that. Iranian community mostly sends out their information through Telegram. The Indian community uses, WhatsApp. The Chinese community uses WeChat. So every community has their own sort of social media app that is, widely used. And all throughout Telegram and all the different groups that are on there have been spreading all this local information, and this is one way of UAE retaliating, shy of any defensive mechanism. This is one way of retaliating with Iran, and the devastating part of that is that in all of this you had the protests that have happened in Iran earlier this year. Estimates of anywhere from 35 to 40,000 people were killed by the Iranian government, by the Iranian regime, and then this war broke out. We're about over a month now, and some estimates say that there's about 5,000 bombs that were dropped on Iran. So everywhere you look at it, and of course, if visas are canceled and Iranians have to go back to their country, then you can imagine what their situation is to also go into a war zone. So yeah, it's devastating all around for the Iranian community in Iran, more so than, of course, outside of the Iran. And as I described, there's a lot of Iranians that cannot go back to Iran because of, when they left, what was their political situation, did they serve in the army? There's all of that stuff that's also an issue as well. And imagine if you've already set up your home in another country, like in this case, UAE, and you have to just pack up and leave because you're no longer welcome in that country, and you have to go back to a country that's in a massive war right now. Let's talk about this whole breaking news about the U.S. F-15 fighter jets that were shot down, and yeah, there's speculation on one pilot still they're being searched for inside of Iran. There has been a reward offered by the Iranian government if this person is found, this pilot's found. The other one was rescued from conflicting stories. Of course, this is an evolving story. So yes, we'll keep an eye on that. But really what this also shows is, President Trump decided to, along with Israel, decided to wage this war through air. And, all the experts have told him that you cannot have a regime change with airstrikes. Yes, he took out the Ayatollah and the entire senior leadership, but then there was another Ayatollah. There's, the system continuing to go on. And as we see, Iran is responding to the attacks through what it's doing in, in its region, and as well as the strikes towards Israel. But if you want to now look at, this conversation about boots on ground by U.S. Army, by U.S. soldiers, the IDF is in Lebanon, so it's going to be American soldiers. Conversations about boots on the ground with them. Well, that's going to be very hard, because if you were to look at the map of Iran, so how do we know a country has, is able to kind of defend itself, right? So when you have more water around a country, it's less likely to be in these dire situations, like, like Canada, for example, right? End to end, we have oceans. Above, we have oceans, and our biggest border south of us is the United States. But the United States also has that insulation with, the Atlantic and the Pacific. In this case, Iran, when you look at its geography, it has the Persian Gulf on the bottom, right, which is the Strait of Hormuz, is that choke point, which it has full control of, because Iran's map covers the entire Persian Gulf. Meanwhile, the other GCC countries have parts of the Persian Gulf, so no one really controls it. Oman is also on the southern part of where that choke point is for the Strait of Hormuz. So if you look at that, okay, so Iran has shut that out. What would make, a global superpower right now, right? Right now we know it's about oil. And I can break this down in many different aspects of it, of what this means in the short term and the long term. But Iran closing that up and now creating a toll system, or countries it gets along with, so it allows them to have oil, such as China and India and so on and forth. Well, if the American troops try to go to Karg Island, well, there could be mines throughout that area, so it's very hard to get to it. Let's say you do get to it, how are you able to keep it? Because on the southern region of Iran is the Zagros Mountains. It's a mountainous region. And then, so if any invasion were to happen, which is what boots on the ground means, well, the mountains also give Iran an advantage to be able to strike down any of the foreign military invasion wise. And then after the mountains, you have desert, right? So if you try to go in through Iraq and this whole thing has shown massive solidarity with Iran. But if you were to go through Iraq, well, you got the mountains there, right? And then if you try to go through, you mentioned Pakistan a few days ago, well, you have the desert there. And Tehran is situated north of all of that. So the whole point would be to get to Tehran, you got to get through the mountains, you got to get through the desert, and then you got to get to Tehran. And there's also mountains around Tehran too. So, and then the only other way is the Caspian Sea, which is above, but then you have Russia and it's closed off. And so that would be not another way to get to Iran. So whichever way you're looking at this, as you're seeing, okay, fighter jets being shot down. So if you're thinking about ground invasion, it's going to prove to be very difficult. And then this whole conversation about, oh, let's go and get the enriched uranium in Esfahan. Well, Esfahan is, you have the mountainous regions and then you have Esfahan. So to even tackle that, and imagine this is a regime, this is a government that's been preparing for this for 50 years. Donald Trump's only had the second administration for 1 year. Pete Hegseth, Secretary of War, has only had the job for a year. So, compare the minds of those people compared to a regime that's been preparing for this for about 5 decades. It's mismatched in that sense. And if you want to talk about what this means for regional power, well, Iran is doing this entire thing, this war, very strategically. And it's so shameful to talk about war as strategy because lives are being lost. But if we're talking about the technicalities of things, which is, again, very shameful, is, Russia's been able to survive what it's been doing, because it has, provides about 11% of the world's oil. Iran was providing 4% of the world's oil. So now, with Iran having the chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz, shutting it down, well, that's 20% of the world's oil. Um, and so immediately Iran, whereas before it was just providing 4%, is now taking control of 20%. So it very much shifts the entire situation of a political power, you could say. And when you have, the Southwest region, Pacific region, relying on Iranian oil, or relying on the oil that comes out of that region of the Persian Gulf, with India 60%, China 40%, Japan 75%. Those are not small numbers at all. So this shifts everything. And so what the big picture could be for Trump, well, we could discuss that. But in the immediate scenario, if Trump decides he's going to, let's say, pull out and say, okay, European Union, NATO, you guys didn't do anything. We don't need your oil. We don't need that oil. We have our own. You guys really need it. Or he kind of throws it on to China, India, Japan, and the rest of them, and says, you guys deal with it. We took out, the Ayatollah, and the rest is yours. It still puts the US in a situation where then Iran becomes more of a regional power in that sense, because now it's negotiating terms, right? And with a toll, with the numbers I've read about $2 million just to pass, that's the revenue that goes back into being able to defend itself militarily. So there's that whole thing that you got to also take into consideration, and then Iran deciding, well, we don't want to use USD for trade on oil, which they're already not doing with China. That again puts the United States in a sticky situation as well. And then of course we need to talk about Canada and how this all affects Canada. When it comes to oil, Canada is a massive oil producing country, but unfortunately when it comes to the east coast of Canada, we rely on imports from Saudi Arabia as well, and that's why we're seeing our prices increasing at the pumps.
Yeah, very good points. And there are so many points that we need to discuss, but we've heard a lot of discussion on this thing, that who is the biggest winner in this war. We've heard some people would say Russia is the biggest winner. Some leaders have even mentioned that Russia is one of the biggest winners. Some people would say China is winning. Others could say India is winning. I don't know. But if I were to name who is the biggest winner in this war, I would say, the companies who are manufacturing all these weapons, they're definitely the biggest winner, even ahead of Russia, China, India, whatever country you want to name, ahead of Israel, ahead of Iran or US. Why I'm saying that? We just heard US President Donald Trump, he's asking for $1.5 trillion budget. That's the defense budget for 2027. So can we imagine $1.5 trillion defense budget for just 1 year in 2027? That's almost a 40% increase. I don't think so after the Second World War, US would have expanded the defense budget in a single year anytime. I can't recall. And we're talking in times when everyone is talking about, oh, the debt was 20 trillion, then 25 trillion, then 30 trillion, 35, it's 39 trillion as we speak. Very quickly moving towards a $50 trillion debt. Can you imagine a $50 trillion debt? And let me tell you why we're talking almost a 50 trillion debt could happen. Because the annual deficit is almost touching 2 trillion every year. So when the annual deficit is almost 2 trillion in a year, you could imagine once it hits, it's already around 39 trillion, the overall debt. So continuous deficits every year, overall debt 39 trillion and touching and clearly increasing towards 50 trillion. What do? You're going to definitely have massive cuts on the non-defense spending. And even in this case as well, I think there is already discussion, cut some funds in education, healthcare, research, or maybe environmental initiatives. Of course, the Trump administration could also always say, the lots of inefficiencies that we are countering. But you know what? 40% increase in the defense budget. That's way, way too much. And I think as much as Trump administration is asking the lawmakers, this definitely will set up some sort of political battle in the Congress. And I would say those countries, who need more and more weapons after this. Canada, we've already mentioned that yes, we have achieved our 2% target of our GDP as far as our defense budget is concerned. And in the next 8 to 10 years, we are going to ramp it up to 5%. Many countries in Europe have been pressurized to do that. President Trump has always been talking about this. NATO alliance can only sustain if you go ahead with 5% of your GDP spending towards the defense budget. So 5% of the GDP towards defense spending. So what are they going to do? They're going to buy more weapons. Of course, there are other areas in defense as far as the pay structure is concerned. Canada has also revised the pay structure. Other countries will also do the same, or they're already revising the pay structure of the defense forces. But a lot of this budget will go into buying weapons. So, and of course in the Middle East countries as well. UA is already in discussions, including India. UA is in discussions with India to buy, India's missile defense system for 600 million. They are discussing that. So lots of weapons will be bought. Whether you're in the business of manufacturing the weapons in US, in France, in England, in Germany, in China, in India, or any other country, I think the lots of countries now who will benefit these weapon manufacturing companies, but we are going to take money away from so many good social causes. I think that's a major concern for me. The biggest winner in this war, the weapon manufacturing company, and the biggest loser in this war, all those countries who would be increasing their defense budget. But what choices are we left with? It's a more and more hostile world. And especially after this war. We're already discussing with Russia and Ukraine. Then there was Arctic sovereignty that has been discussed a lot. And here we are after this war, more spending towards the defense budget. Rumonaji, your take on this, please.
Yeah, it's very devastating. This is after in the United States they had cut SNAP, what was termed Obamacare, Medicaid, and a lot of different Meals on Wheels, a lot of different social programs were cut in this past year. And now, that what they're asking for money for the defense budget, they're looking at cutting more from healthcare as well. So, I mean, it's a very devastating situation to go fund a war in a different country, to kill people. But yet not take care of your own. I mean, this reminds me of what you had mentioned about Marco Rubio's interview about why does a country not take care of its own citizens? If it has prosperity, if it has access to natural resources, if it's, and in the case of the United States, it's one of the richest countries in the world. Yet, they don't have access to proper education. I mean, it's very expensive to go to university. You can get around to going to community college. Healthcare. I mean, you want to go do a checkup. Do you have $500 to pay just for a checkup? You wanna, you want to deliver a baby. That's at least $40,000. I mean, just basic healthcare. A lot of people don't go even get checkups or to go attend to their basic needs because they have to pay unless they have insurance coverage. And if they have insurance and they have to go to places that their insurance covers. I mean, everywhere you look at it, when it comes to, they don't have maternity leave. The way we have here, maternity leave, paternity leave, it's not a thing there. The average vacation there is about 2 weeks. I mean, it's really a country of the haves and the have-nots. Yeah, you have its massive tech sector, you have its oil sector, you have, big industries, but when you drive through America, you can see infrastructure isn't at to par. And especially if you drive through middle America, and even if you go out of, the centers of like Manhattan, you just go out to, upstate New York, or if you go out to other parts of some of these really rich states versus the states just that don't have it. So, it's a very sad time because this is a president who won decisively and was able to get the number of share of votes because he campaigned on taking care of America. I mean, the whole concept of America first had nothing to do with wars in the Middle East or anything else. So it's a massive U-turn, and the rate it's going at is a massive escalation. And then to your point on other countries having to remilitarize, yeah, Japan will need to, South Korea will need to, Taiwan is thinking any day now, what is China going to do? And especially like if you're thinking about the devastation they're going through right now, dozens of countries have introduced policies where they have to ration out their electricity, conserve their fuel, and hoard fertilizer. This is as a result of this war because the Strait of Hormuz provided all of those aspects to some of those countries in that region, right? So some policies are drive alternative days, work from home. Myanmar, for example, there's limits to 15 liters of fuel per week for drivers. That's in Sri Lanka. The alternative days of driving is from Myanmar. Australian states are also having an issue there because they rely heavily on this oil access. So, they've come up with measures of making public transportation for free. But so it's just to decrease people wanting to, drive their own vehicles. In Thailand, you have them, telling people to, as little as taking off their jackets so they don't use the energy of air conditioning while they're driving. In Pakistan, they're told that, when it comes to sports fans that have to watch cricket, they should do it at home to conserve fuel. So, every little way of life is being shifted around because, this is serious. JP Morgan said if this continues by mid-April, we're in a very bad situation because the countries that have reserves are using up their oil reserves, and the bigger share of the countries that are getting their oil out of the Strait of Hormuz, but not the same rate that it is used to, has been China and India. But even India is rationing as well. So you have this entire thing playing out, but then imagine if now you remilitarize and you have to spend your country's budget on that, and what that means on, like what you said, on healthcare and other basic necessities that you must provide for your country, for your nation. And then we can talk about Canada and Canada's exposure in all of this, of course.
Ymedia Group, the fastest growing media group in North America.